This Sunday, we continue our Folly of Kings series, and we're going to take a look at King Hezekiah, who ruled the southern kingdom of Judah from about 715 to 686 BC, about 30 years. And Scripture tells us he was a good king like David. He purified the temple, he reestablished worship and singing, sacrifices to God, he initiated the Passover, he filled the temple with riches, and he tore down idols in the land. Then came a threat from Assyria, which was the largest, most powerful nation in the world at this time. And Assyria took the northern kingdom, and then they laid siege to all of the fortified cities in Judah. And then they made their way to the capital in Jerusalem, and they surrounded it. And they spoke propaganda and psychological warfare to the people to terrify them and to get them to turn on King Hezekiah and to get Hezekiah to doubt himself and God. Well, Hezekiah first tries to bargain with the Assyrians. Then he fortifies the wall of Jerusalem. Then he reroutes the water outside the city to flow inside the city. And they're brilliant things, but he's just delaying the inevitable. So Hezekiah prays, and then he sends messengers to Isaiah the prophet. And Isaiah tells Hezekiah not to fear, that God is not going to let the Assyrians take Jerusalem. And then just after that, God sends an angel to strike down 185,000 Assyrian soldiers. Sennacherib, who is the king of Assyria, then retreats back to his homeland, where he is killed by his sons, just like Isaiah the prophet prophesied that he would be. So Judah is saved. Hezekiah is a king that definitely heard a lot of voices. He heard voices from the Assyrian commander who shouted propaganda and psychological warfare at him and the people. He heard from his advisors. He heard from the common people. And he heard from God through Isaiah. Hezekiah had to decide what to do. He decided to trust God. And you might say he had no other choice. But that doesn't really do Hezekiah justice. He definitely wanted to glorify God. Until he didn't. Hezekiah was physically sick during most of this time. And Hezekiah was about to die, and he cried out to God. And then God gave him 15 more years of life. And during this time, surprisingly, Hezekiah gets really prideful. He stops following the voice of God. He shows off his riches to the king of Babylon. He got too close to this king, and then the prophet Isaiah comes to him and says, they're going to be the ones to take everything from your future generations. Hezekiah's response, at least it's not going to happen in my lifetime. This is certainly not a great ending, although Hezekiah was a righteous king overall. So in your small groups, I would like it if you would discuss how a crisis can reveal our true colors, our faith, but also in crisis, we can actually rely on God because we feel like we have to, and then when things get good again, we can forget about Him. In your small groups, I'd like you to discuss the voices in our culture that can distract us from God's voice, from hearing His voice, and from following Him. What do they sound like? Discuss how to better discern God's voice today. And then finally, I would like you to discuss how following Jesus' voice and following Jesus is the only path to true joy.